This week, Stephen Grossman from Bay Dynamics joins us. In our startup and security notes of interest, a surge in startups and capital could be bad news. Breaking records, enterprise fundings are now up 80% in Q1 of this year. Second seed rounds are on the rise. Deep Sentinel raises $7.4 million in a Series A. Cisco makes an acquisition. And updates on our journeys. All that and more on this edition of Startup Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show about security startups, how to secure your startup, and advice for security startups. It's Startup Security Weekly.
I need it from the top.
Brought to you by, do you have a website, an external presence, employees, an office? Any of these things can be compromised and attacked. How are you defending these assets? Have you penetration tested these public assets? Start 2017 by taking a proactive approach to securing your vulnerable areas. Black Hills Information Security has been helping companies find their weaknesses since 2008. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com and see how they can help you sleep better at night. Gain control of cyber risk with Tenable.io, the first vulnerability management platform built for today's elastic assets like cloud, containers, and web apps. Discover a fresh, asset-based approach that prioritizes vulnerabilities while seamlessly integrating into your environment. And improve ROI with the first elastic licensing approach based on assets, not IP addresses. Tenable.io delivers the data and context you need to secure your elastic attack surface. Start your free Tenable.io trial today by visiting Tenable.io. Welcome to Startup Security Weekly. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, for May 5th, 2017. The Cinco de Mayo edition, episode 43. I don't think we have anything special prepared for Cinco de Mayo. It's poor planning on our part. So maybe at the end we'll do some tequila. Maybe right now we'll do some tequila shots. It'd be awesome. On the lines via Skype, the soon-not-to-be beach bum, Mr. Michael Santarcangelo is with us. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, sir. I almost can't see you. Are you like hiding there? Is that do you have like dark camo on today?
I do. I have the city blue camo shirt on today.
I couldn't even see you.
I have way more show appearances than I do shirts. So it's, you know.
It's funny. I thought about that today.
Yeah, like sometimes I look at the videos and I'm like, oh, I wore that shirt on another episode. Wow. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
We got to get a clothing sponsor.
Yeah. Well, all the cool shows have that, right? Wardrobe provided by. That's
right.
Need.
That's what we need. We need that. I'm down with that. That way I can wear a different shirt on every show.
That's right.
I can't afford to wear a different shirt on every show.
You know what we need to do?
Well, I could, but they'd be really bad.
It's like Garanimals. We need to color code you
yes.
so that, each of the shows has a different color scheme that you wear. And that way we know what show you're on just by looking at you and how you're dressed.
This is true.
All right. So we're off to a good start today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a weird day. I have the program that runs the production for all of our shows is getting a massive overhaul. So been a little preoccupied with that, which is kind of interesting as it relates to startups and such. You kind of get in that zone if you're re-overhauling the product that someone has just given you some Series A funding for. It's a little stressful. So that's what's going on here this week in Security Weekly. Michael, why don't you introduce our special guest for today?
Yeah, I'm excited because so Stephen Grossman from Bay Dynamics is joining us. And, I look at the little details sometimes. So he's got a degree in economics and computer security. So it's kind of like the best of all the worlds, nice. As I always like to see it. 20 years of experience cutting across services and now looking at products. But what really caught my attention was Steve and I met a couple weeks ago, and it was specifically looking at Bay Dynamics' approach to addressing one of the challenges in our industry, which is how do you quantify cybersecurity? How do you quantify risk? How do you add financial dollars to it? And I'll add, I'm not sure if he sees it this way, but we'll talk to him about it. How do you start pushing security and some of that responsibility out to other people? How do you show them value in it? And I was really taken with it. And so I said, hey, come join us and talk about some of this. So, hopefully I didn't set the bar too high for you, but welcome to the show, Stephen.
As long as we stay away from the economics topic, I'm okay. But,
it's just
thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today, Stephen. So what advice do you have for startups today, given your background?
Well, first note to self: expect some swag in the mail, and in the next couple of days, you'll get a couple of Bay Dynamics shirts.
Thank you.
So you have something else to wear. The startup ride's been a blast. I spent over 20 years on the management consulting side at places like Pricewaterhouse and on my own at places like EMC. And so making that jump to the product side of the house has really been a blast, and really been a roller coaster, and I've been enjoying it for the last 2.5 years.
And I was gonna say, you've been there almost 3 years. One of the things we ask people sometimes in this type of a situation is, okay, so what drew you to it? So you didn't work for small companies, Stephen. You had, and you're in New York. You've got a lot of opportunity. So when you look at something like Bay Dynamics doing a product, I mean, that's a shift. So I'm kind of curious, two things. What made that attractive to you to take on that new role? And you've been doing it for 2.5 years. I'm going to take that as a sign you're still digging it. I know from our conversations you're on point with it. So what's the experience been like now that you've made the decision? But take us through some of that process of making that shift.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, you're right. I've dealt on the corporate side for all my career, although I've done that from the point of view of both very large firms like Pricewaterhouse, as well as on my own, and a couple of instances in between that were small startups as well. But it was always dealing with the large corporate environment, often on the financial services side. What really attracted me to Bay Dynamics first and foremost were the people. I mean, the founders, Ferris Rafai and Ryan Stolte, are incredibly bright people that really, that they got together really not even so much for what they're doing as much as to work together, because they enjoyed working together so much. And that culture has really pervaded the company, even though now we're up over 80 people. That same culture has persisted through the company. I mean, for me, it was really the something I've always wanted to do, and it was the intersection of a lot of good things that happened all at once. But that intersection of security and risk and business intelligence and analytics and strategy and program management, all things that I've done throughout my career, really attracted me to the company. And it's been a great ride since. To your point, really digging it, especially as we are, kind of leading the market and trying to push the market forward towards a risk-based approach to security.
I really like that. I'm sorry, Paul. I wanted to follow up on one thing, because I noticed something as you were explaining it, Stephen, which is important to a lot of people listening. A lot of people think that what matters to investors, or now even potential team members, is how awesome the tech is. And what you're saying is, no, I looked at the team. It was great people. These are people I want to be around. And then I looked at the opportunity and I liked it, but I didn't yet hear you say, and the tech was remarkable. Now, I'm not saying it's not. What I'm pointing out is that having a problem that gets people excited or inspired to solve with great people is always going to make a difference. And I think that your experience is just, underscoring that for people a little bit. And so that's kind of cool. Like I liked how that came together, at least in my head. Paul, go ahead. And I had a question.
Yeah, for whatever reason, Stephen just sparked this question. Given your background in large organizations and large enterprises and startups as well, in today's security market, what drives a large company to purchase a technology like big data, machine learning, AI, that are all the buzzwords today? What drives them to purchase that from a startup versus build it themselves, and what are the pros and cons of each?
Yeah, I mean, I think the industry has actually grown in its acceptance of startup companies. I mean, Bay Dynamics is actually hardly a startup. We've been around since 2001. We were a services company actually for the first 2/3 of our existence, and have pivoted about 5 years ago, into a full-fledged product company. But I think large enterprises, banks, and the such have realized things like security and using even ML and AI for security are not competitive differentiators for them in the same sense that their core businesses are, and that they don't want to get into the software business. They want to be in the trading business or the banking business or whatever they're in. And so they look to companies for innovation. And historically, always the small startup environments have been environments that have driven innovation, rather than the larger companies, where sometimes it's harder to get through the red tape and the bureaucracy to really innovate.
It's funny you say that. I just, as a preview for our audience, I've got a story on just that coming out next week Stephen, it's almost like you read the notes for it ahead of time. So that makes me excited. It means I've got something right.
You're on to something.
And I think we should go ahead and share it. So let's flip for a second to Bay Dynamics, because I've got some questions and I want to see, maybe test if I got some of my perception right. Now you guys call it, I believe, Risk Fabric. Did I remembered that right? Correct?
That's right.
All right.
Yes.
So the way I looked at it then is that it's kind of unique. One of the things I always ask people, and Paul and I have had this conversation a lot when we talk about Straight Talk and looking at impact, is that it almost seems like somebody at Bay said, you know what, there's a lot of different tools out there, and I don't know if you're always getting all the information out of it, and I don't know if you're putting it together with the right context and acting on it. And when you and I looked at it, it was like, oh, so you guys can pretty much read from everything or anything, and then you bring it together, apply some of your own stuff to it, including user behavior analytics, and then give people guidance. And I think that's a pretty compelling solution. Did I explain it fairly well? I mean, I'm sure you have a better way of explaining it, but how'd I do as a starting point?
I'm not in the marketing department, so I'll punch on the better explanation. But I think
we'll ask Abby later.
I think you did a great job. I think it wasn't a light bulb that went off initially. It was something that evolved over time through our interaction with our customers, and we're very customer driven in terms of how we drive our product roadmap. Our first iteration of Risk Fabric was actually a pure UEBA, user and entity behavior analytics insider threat product. But what we realized very quickly was that was one very narrow piece of the puzzle. And what was really needed, and what the feedback we had gotten from customers, is that what was really required is a comprehensive view of their environment from a risk point of view. And so that requires not only insider threat, but a broader view of threats in general and vulnerabilities, and especially asset value, and being able to pull that all together and then get that information out to the right people at the right time, which is always an important part of the puzzle. If you just have all that information sitting in the back someplace, it doesn't really do you much good.
Paul, I know you spent a lot of time. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but one of the things that mattered when I was listening to Stephen go through some of this is that, you spent a lot of time looking at vulnerability management. You and I spent a lot of time talking about it and looking at it. And it's kind of interesting how they're pulling a lot of that stuff into it. So when you were in that situation, would it have been useful to you to have blended in some of that who owns the asset and what do you think it's worth? And oh, by the way, here's what our DLP is telling us and here's what our SIM's telling us. What's kind of your take on that?
Certainly the first part, and I think that's something that a lot of organizations struggle with, is who owns the data. Well, first, what is sensitive data to you? So, how do you classify it? Who owns the data? And there might be two different tiers of that, right? There's who owns the systems and the applications, and then who's the data curator or the end user of the data. So those are two different roles. And then, where does all that data live and where is it transferred? And, we've talked about this in many different perspectives on different shows. Stephen, how do you approach that particular problem? Because for me, that's kind of the foundation of pretty much every security program that you should have in your organization. So given your background, how do you approach that with different organizations?
That is really the key, right? And what we've done is we've pivoted the view to entities, right? To people, to users, to machines, applications. So you're not looking at 100,000 DLP incidents. You're not looking at 100,000 vulnerabilities. You're looking at it from the other point of view, right? What's the business value of the application? Who owns the application? What machines are part of that application? And then what are the threats and vulnerabilities hitting that? So you're not looking at it at an individual incident level. You're looking at so to speak, you're looking at the picture of the screen, not the pixels, and trying to make sense of them yourself. We're making sense of that for you, prioritizing it for you, and then pushing it out to let you know that you've got those risks, whether it's an insider threat that is exfiltrating data, whether it's vulnerabilities, static code analyses, or what have you, pen test vulnerabilities. It all comes together at the application and then gets pushed out to the right people. So, from a data protection point of view, it's near and dear to our heart, and especially with some of the regulations that have just come up around New York State Department of Financial Services. PCI has been a long-term regulation. GDPR out in Europe is a big data protection regulation coming up next year. Being able to understand that from the point of view to exactly as you said, what's the important data? What are the threats and vulnerabilities that have potential of actually getting access to that data? and how do we stop them before they get there?
So one of the things that I think is neat too is that you guys have focused on how to quantify the risk. Talk about both the importance of that and maybe a little bit of some of the ways that you guys approach that, because to me that's novel. Now I'm sure somebody out there is listening saying, "Oh, they're not the only ones." Cool. Send me a note. Tell me who else is doing it. But that's one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting because, let's go back to this conversation that we've started here. A lot of times in security, we'll say, "Oh, this is a high vulnerability." And that's predicated on whatever we thought or what the score of it was. It may or may not matter in terms of the assets that we have to protect in the organization. You guys take a slightly different approach. So how does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's really the intersection of everything that we've talked about, right? So we've been quantifying risk to an extent for a few years now. The big leap we've taken is to be able to financially quantify it and really measure your residual risk, right? Taking a look at, again, not to sound like a broken record, those threats and vulnerabilities in the context of your application. The way we see it and the way we've broken it down is if you have a safe, you could either get access to the combination for the safe, or you could blow the doors off the safe with some dynamite. And then inside the safe, there's either something of value or not, right? So being able to put it in the context of the risk to users, the risk to machine-based threats, whether it's malware, whether it's bots or whatever else coming through the environment. And then most importantly, what's the potential for that, for those threats to actually hit the target, right? What are the vulnerabilities that are exposing that target, and what's the potential for them to come together, right? And so to your point, instead of looking at the most critical vulnerability, it's important to be looking at the most critical vulnerability relative to the business value of the asset that it has potential of hitting. It's great if you solve all your critical vulnerabilities, but if they're all sitting on a machine that's in a lab somewhere, and you've ignored a medium vulnerability that's going to affect your critical trading system or what have you, you've done a great job technically, right? And you can say I've patched all my critical vulnerabilities, but what you can't say is that I've done a good job protecting my company, which is really the goal, right? It's all about reducing the risk to the company. And we talk about it a lot in physical terms, right? If you have a building. You insure the building for fire and for theft, right? You have your locks on the doors, you have your fire alarms, you have your smoke alarms. So those areas that have the products of the most value, right? When you go into a store, the jewelry is sitting behind a casing. The toiletries are sitting out on the shelf and open because of the greater value one way or the other. You want to put greater levels of protection as well as making sure that you're monitoring those environments more closely.
All right, so this seems like the kind of thing that we've been asking for in security for a long time, right? So in your experiences, you're starting to roll this out. Are you finding any surprising friction, or are you finding that the other business units are saying, about time you guys asked me whether this was important or not? It's a thank you. Now my voice is heard. Like, I'm sure the experience is not so much on either side. It's somewhere in the middle. But as you guys are rolling this out and you're working with customers and you're kind of seeing the results, maybe what's the biggest thing about it that surprised you? And I know you got a long experience in the industry, so it might be hard to surprise you. Is there anything that did surprise you?
Yeah, I mean, look, people have been trying to attack this problem with different methodologies and different perspectives. There's certainly a lot of analogous methodologies in the operational risk world and the financial risk world. We've been measuring value at risk in the financial in banks and in brokerages for years and years. What's probably most surprising is in the environments that we go into, the greatest challenge we come across is actually an understanding and a knowledge of their assets and the value that's attached to them. And so, we have some methodologies, we call them t-shirt sizing and some other implementation methodologies that help companies pull that data together, make sense of that data so that it can be used in the process of quantification, right? And the real differentiator for us is that everything we do is data-based, right? There's no part of this that's a manual process. We're basing our information on telemetry in your environment. So once we have that asset data gathered and compiled in the way we were speaking earlier, everything else is coming in on a daily basis, lining up with that and pushing out to the right people. So the asset owners know those areas of greatest risk to their applications. The CISO knows that in financial terms, and he can then use that working with the board so that he can prioritize, say, when he's going for that $1 million DLP system, he could talk about the insider threat exposure, right? When he's going for his infrastructure refresh, he could talk about the cost benefit of the risk to those applications versus the cost of going to newer platforms that could be patched on a more regular basis.
Yeah, I like that. So I've got a thought that I want to throw out, but then I've got a secondary follow-up that I think is slightly more important. But here's the thought, because when you and I first talked about this, I know I pushed you hard on, okay, but how accurate is their data? I mean, do they actually? And where I was coming from was a background that says when we go do like any sort of analysis with people, and I say, well, what's it worth? I usually get one of two things: I don't know, or mine is the most important ever, and it's worth a lot. And I think now that I've had time to think about it, what I've realized is that because you're giving that power to people to do that, you also commented that the CIO, the CFO get a chance to comment on it. But what I also started thinking about was you're giving people ranges, you're making it easier for them to understand that quantification process. And frankly, if they get it wrong, like as they overestimate it, it's going to bubble up too fast. And if they don't get it right because they underestimate it, they're going to get a lot of scrutiny. And so what I've started to realize is that this probably normalizes out far faster than I gave it credit for, which means for you and anybody else trying to solve it, perfection is not necessarily important, as is gathering data and seeing it. And I'm actually going to go ahead and bet we'll see in future iterations everything you guys learn from this rollout will get rolled into future types of things. Now, that said then, and feel free to pivot on it if you want, but the more salient point or the question I wanted to ask is, does this then start to mean that if you can help me and my team prioritize where I need to go do something, that then a week or 2 weeks or a month later, whatever the period is, I can come back and say, this was how much risk I thought we had, and we took these actions and we reduced the risk. Or it had, like, are you, when we can quantify risk at that level, are you then giving a security leader that ability to go back and say, this was good for this reason? And not just because I said so, because those numbers came from other people in the organization, not from me. Am I overreaching on this?
No, not at all. Not at all. And the words you use actually took the words out of my mouth, right? It's not letting perfect be the enemy of good, right? And shooting for accuracy, not necessarily precision. And you can't get anywhere if you don't get started. And so, start with your most important applications. Every company knows what their most important applications are. There's obviously a long tail to that of applications that are secondary or tertiary, but everybody knows which are their trading applications in a bank. Everybody knows their PCI applications because they have to for regulatory purposes. You need to get started somewhere, and you need to use those guidelines and those ranges in order to frame it out. And you're right, the use of ranges and the use of what we call T-shirt sizes helps normalize that data so that it makes a lot more sense. In terms of tracking it on a regular basis, it's not a monthly or quarterly thing. Every single day, the system is calculating your residual risk, and it is incorporating the results of the actions you took the day before. And so it's not look at it a month later, it's seeing what today's residual risk is versus yesterday's, and most importantly, the system prescribing for you. Since we know what's contributing to that residual risk, we can tell you the most important things you could do today to reduce your risk are patch the following vulnerabilities on the following systems, mitigate the following insider threat, look at this indicator of attack in the scheme of your infrastructure. And so that combination of transparency through measurement, the ability to understand the results of your actions on a daily basis, and then the prescription of what to do on a daily basis is really what's driving towards reducing your risks, so that you can talk about, exactly as you said, the amount of risk you've taken out of the business, not the number of X, Y, or Z incidents that you've mitigated, because that's just a technical metric that's not necessarily meaningful in the context of the business.
Yeah, no, that's what I love is you're giving it to people in business language. And Paul, I know I stepped on you again. Let me ask you a question, Stephen, in this direction then. And I think when you and I last talked, I kind of pushed. I was like, oh, so something about cloud. Like I asked you, and you're like, no, we're on prem. But so my question is then, are you aggregating lessons? And I know everybody gets touchy-feely about this. Phrase it whatever the artful way is. But are you able to aggregate and/or provide benchmarking to people, or is that something you think you'll be able to provide, or is it necessary?
I mean, I think that's certainly a direction we're looking to go in the future. We don't do that today. I think the first question every board director asks of a CISO is, how are we doing relative to the peers in our industry?
Absolutely, right? Yeah.
Nobody wants to be spending more than their peers. Nobody wants to be spending less than their peers. Nobody wants to be out of range, relative to those in their group. And that's certainly a direction we're going to be going in the future, to be able to aggregate that up in an anonymous way so that we can do comparables without exposing anybody's data. Right? And that's not something that we get involved with yet today, but will be in the future.
Stephen, how are you helping other security technologies work better in the environment? Like, what are the biggest wins? Because I feel like that when people go shop for vulnerability management, or they go shop for some kind of indicators of compromise or incident response, and they don't have the context that what we're talking about inside the organization, that they're either hesitant to buy or they just buy the wrong things. Whereas if they know about the risks and the data and the people involved, they can go acquire the correct technologies and integrate them together. So do you have some of those integration stories that are awesome?
Absolutely, and I think it's an excellent point, because one of the things that we do overall is we really make what's going on there. Otherwise, we make all the other tools that we pull in better by being able to put it in the context of each other as well as the business as a whole. And so, at the outset, when we went into some customers and some clients, the SIM guys would say, "Hey, we could do that." It's not something that's so novel. What they came to realize was, they can't do that exactly in that context, but more importantly, we help make the SIM tools better. We help make the DLP tools better and the vulnerability management tools better by being able to take that data in, put it in context, measure the risk, and then push data back out to those underlying tools to improve their prioritization and how they're getting remediated. And so it's a win-win for everybody. The business gets what they need in order to manage their risk, and all the operations folks around the environment get what they need to better prioritize and make the most of what they're doing. And then most importantly, the application owners and the guys on the front line of the business are protecting their applications, and by extension their business better than they could before.
Yeah, I've seen huge wins in vulnerability management and patching programs that integrate this type of thing. A lot of people that I speak with that do it well, the small percentage that do that really, really well, have custom software that they've written specifically for them to say, yeah, I see this new vulnerability and it's on a system and this is the owner. These are the mitigating circumstances, and here's how we move forward with remediation. That stuff's awesome. Some people get tired maintaining it themselves. It sounds like your solution is an alternative to that, which is really nice.
It is, and it's funny you say that, because we run into many prospects and many clients that did build something on their own, whether it's on the metrics automation and reporting side, whether it's on the vulnerability automation side. But to your point, they really don't want to be in the business of writing and supporting software. They want to be in the business of protecting their business and running a security operation. We maintain the integrations, and more importantly, we're always advancing the functionality and the capabilities in a way that's not really practical for any one organization to do unless they want to become a software development shop.
Yeah, and I always warn people, especially with all of the new security startups we have out there today, as they start implementing integrations, and as you as a startup start thinking about integrations, the devil's in the details, right? Because vendor X says, well, I've got an integration with vendor Y. But what does that mean? What exactly does it let me do? Is it just telling me stuff, or is it letting me do stuff? How is it letting me do stuff? So I think people can choose products and go, oh, that integration's great. And then when they dig into it, they're like, wow, it's really limited. And then either side doesn't want to put any more time or effort or money into that integration, and then you're stuck.
It is, and integration's a messy business. And what enterprises have come to learn is that when they write it themselves, next month when the underlying product changes their software and changes their schema or changes their API, they're in this constant chase of trying to manage that while we manage all that for you. I mean, one of the great benefits we provide is that maintenance, but more importantly, the time to value. We can install and plug in a matter of hours and days and see value right away. Because of the fact that we understand the underlying tools intimately, and we have integration packs for many of them, and we have an integration wizard for whatever we don't have integration packs for, that just in a matter of hours we can very quickly plug into a tool, start sucking that data in, and as soon as we do that, everything starts lighting up in the product.
Nice.
You know what I love listening to, because it's kind of neat when I actually shut my mouth and just listen, is that because Stephen, you haven't really had access to it, but Paul and I have been talking for the last couple of weeks about value proposition, and it's important not just for startups but for security teams and for vendors. And so I've actually developed an 18-point rubric, just basics, like just here's the 18 points you need to cover. And mentally, as you're talking, I'm like checking off a whole list, which is great because as a compliment, there's a lot of people who don't, or they haven't thought about it, or they don't like the answers that they have to come up with. And so it's neat for me, at least, to hear some of those things come together. And that's part of the reason I think I wanted you on the program. So, I'm glad that you're here and joining us. So let's do this. Because you guys have that fabric, you have that integration, and you're seeing the things that are working in the security space today, let's pivot for a second. Let's talk about startup as like an ecosystem. Where do you think some of the biggest opportunities in the security industry are today? So knowing what you know, with all of your experience and your current products experience and the way that you're helping enterprises solve some of these problems, absent whatever Bay can do, where do you think there's promise, or there's some excitement? Where do you think that people in startups should potentially focus if they're excited about it too?
I mean, I think the challenges and the opportunities are greater than ever before, right? With our mobile world and with IoT, and with all the new vectors of attack to large enterprises. As soon as you walk into your employer and you turn your phone on and you connect it up to the Wi-Fi, you immediately become a vector of attack for that company. And so, I think the challenges are great, but I think the opportunities are great as well. With the advancements we've seen in machine learning and artificial intelligence and automation, I think that's really the greatest areas of opportunity to be able to allow the machines to do a lot of the thinking and to automate as much as possible. Today, not to keep going back to Risk Fabric and Bay, but today what we do is we orchestrate the information so that the operators have more intelligent information to work off of. They have to do a quick review and then click the button to take the action. Right. The future is when you start integrating artificial intelligence and machine learning into that picture. A lot of that becomes automated. You get rid of the need for a lot of the lower level reviews, and as an extension, the protections become a lot better. So. Everything from threat and vulnerability response to things like deception technologies and virtual red teams. There's a lot of opportunity, both in the testing and vulnerability side as well as the response side around those technologies.
Well, I love that because we actually just did a segment on another show about deception technologies and honeypots. And basically what we said was get your house in order first. And I think what you've described, Stephen, certainly is one of the most fundamental things that an organization can do to get their house in order. And once you have that process down, then you can start looking at some of these more advanced startups that are doing some really great innovative things, such as deception technology has really worked its way into our industry, which is great. So, yeah, that's awesome. Stephen, I want to thank you very much for appearing on Startup Security Weekly today. Before I let you go, though, we're going to talk a little bit about Wild West Hackin' Fest, which is a conference coming up in October, very much focused on practitioners, hands-on labs, and hands-on fun with IoT devices, software-defined radio. All kinds of fantastic speakers from the security community will be there October 26th through the 27th in Deadwood, South Dakota, which, I mean, if you haven't been to South Dakota, here is your chance to go to South Dakota. So make sure you check that out, wildwesthackinfest.com. That's HACKIN Fest.com. Stephen, again, thank you very much for appearing on Startup Security Weekly.
Thank you, guys. It was my pleasure.
We'll be